Alright, so in this video I'm going to attempt to answer whether cryonics makes sense, especially in light of many worlds, and in light of empty individualism / open individualism. Okay, so first things first. In previous videos, in order to motivate a physicalist picture of consciousness, of existence, of experience, I brought up points. So I said that experience is really much more like points as opposed to some set which contains your soul. So there's just all these points, each one is a different configuration of a mind, and from the inside of there, behind that screen, you can't tell that you're also here. I can't tell that I'm experiencing that, but there's only one experiencer, or you could say there's no experiencer. Each experience just exists from its inside, and that's it. So the points are to sort of motivate that physicalist picture and counter a soul view in which you have a particular set of points, which is its own consciousness. So that's sort of the line view, where you think in the way that Christianity or Islam, some sort of desert philosophy that you really need to get over. So the points are to motivate that. But the points aren't actually the correct picture either. Not precisely. Because from a reductionistic perspective, you have a brain with no Cartesian theater. You have a brain and there's no Cartesian theater in this thing. So the Cartesian theater is the idea that you have this homunculus, this ascent into a place where there is something watching the screen, something watching the movie, or that there is a screen at all, into which things are presented at a precise time. So you have all these subconscious processes, and then somehow at some specific time, they ascend into the screen of consciousness. That's what most people actually still believe. It's this dualism. It's this Cartesian theater. They don't view the world in very reductionistic terms, in which there is no such thing. There's just the processing. So there's just sounds being processed, there's sights being processed, there's sensations, there's thoughts saying whatever they're saying, and they just exist from their inside in their own location, belonging to no one. They don't belong to anyone in particular, they just happen from their inside. And so that's actually the reductionist position, that's the physicalist position, and it also vibes with at least the sort of classically Buddhist view, in which there are just the 6 aggregate model, I think it was, or 7, or I think it was 6, and where sights are sights, senses are senses, whatever. There's no one to whom they are happening. So that's the physicalist view. There is no real place of presentation. We exist in a tenseless object. It's just an eternal object. There is no time at which you are precisely this particular screenshot of reality. That, like I said, that was just to sort of, it's certainly closer to reality to think in terms of points as like little screenshots compared with the linear view, where you are like this continuous soul all along, moving from one place to the next. This is certainly at least closer, in which there's just some configurations which are more similar to this one. And some configurations here believe that they came from this 8-year-old and so on. That's closer, but it's still not precisely the real picture. So it's not precisely the real picture because of that, because of the lack of a real Cartesian theater that could be defined in neuroscience and philosophy of mind. Okay, so the next thing is to motivate what we really are, we have to, if we're not points, then what is it? So we have to bring up what reality really is made out of, which is quantum mechanics. So in quantum mechanics, when you have a continuous variable, such as position, you actually don't have a point mass. A position is a continuous variable. It's not a point mass, because location can't be something which equals 0. So whenever you try to find the probability of finding a position, when you try to find a position, you integrate over this. You do integration. And if you were to integrate over a point mass, you would get 0. This would equal 0. So you can't. So what you do instead is you're working with complex numbers. You're not working with points. That's what you do the integration over. So you have an eigenvalue. I don't know why I'm using this fucking marker. It doesn't even work. Fuck. I get angry very easily. Okay, we have an eigenvalue given a wave function, right? And then we square this, and that's the Born rule. That's the Born rule, which describes what we see in reality. For some reason or another, we don't know why you have to multiply this complex conjugate by itself, and that gives us a probability of something occurring. We have no idea. Like, where does the Born rule actually come from? I wrote like a fiction story in which it just happens to correspond to the whims of some high school girl called Ada. Now, that's probably not the case in reality, but we still can't actually derive this except in a circular fashion. So people like Sean Carroll or in quantum Bayesianism, you try to derive the Born rule simply from this is what rational agents would predict. This is what corresponds to the epistemic status of rational agents. And so it essentially does seem to just come down to that. And we don't know anything else about it. We don't know where it really comes from. But this is what describes reality. So you have an eigenvalue, and then you have the wave function. So given the wave function, you square this, and then you get this probability distribution. You get the amplitude. But there are just amplitudes. So physics is continuous, in other words. You don't actually have points anywhere. You don't really have discrete objects. You never have discrete objects. This has been falsified. This has been falsified through experiment. You don't have discrete objects, you just have amplitude distributions. So if you just have amplitude distributions making up your brain, obviously you just have amplitude distributions making up your consciousness. So you are part of this eternal object, which, what's more, doesn't contain discrete objects. It is a continuous function. So there is no screenshot here, and then screenshot here, and then screenshot here, and then you're making a transition, much less, making a transition. That would be the same as, might as well make the line, and then you're back to the desert. So when you're considering cryonics, first of all, you must understand that you've already won. You don't have to worry about ceasing to exist forever. You're already everywhere. Where consciousness is from its inside, it can't tell that it's in other locations. And there's no one fundamentally traveling. So you don't have to think, will my consciousness make the jump from here to here to here, whatever. That's of no concern. That should be of no concern to you. What should be of concern to you is, do I love myself? Do I want mind configurations in the future which are very similar to me, or which will appropriate me, which will think themselves to have come from me in the same way that I think I come from some 8-year-old kid? If you think that is a favorable thing to do, then you should do cryonics, because you are assured to succeed in the universal wave function. You will infinitely succeed, in fact. An infinite amount of yous will succeed. But of course, we don't reason that way, and we shouldn't reason that way, because we have to measure the larger infinities as opposed to the others. But I think that in this case with cryonics, it's really such an edge case where what do you really have to lose? What, like, if you don't do it, you're guaranteed to have far, 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 far fewer infinities of you. And if you think that you are worthy of existing or being similar to you, then you should absolutely do cryonics. This is not the same thing that you should do in considering your investments. You don't want to go and train yourself in Bollinger Bands and moving average, convergence, divergence, and all these other technical analysis tools and go into the stock market or cryptocurrencies or whatever and try to beat the markets because, after all, an infinite amount of you succeed. That's not rational. You should adhere to the Born rule, because this is sort of, it's kind of like God. It's like this thing which contains the largest infinity for some reason. And you should be serving that. Like, you should be serving rationality, that which contains the larger infinities, even though all the other infinities are also there. And you are experiencing them. It's not like you're not experiencing all the other ones. You are, but they are smaller infinities. And so until we can be certain that, that they're not equivalent, which they don't seem to be, and mathematics says that there are, in fact, larger infinities than others, you should treat these as eudolons that are just like discrete eudolons, even if they are technically infinite eudolons.